I watched my husband slow dance with another woman on the very night we were supposed to celebrate our second anniversary. The music was soft, the lights glittered across the room, and every guest froze in disbelief. Whispers rose like smoke in the air, people covering their mouths, exchanging glances, unable to look away. My husband's hand slid across her waist as if I had ceased to exist, and there I stood, the wife in the sparkling gown, the woman everyone pitied, but instead of tears, I gave them a smile that hid everything they could never imagine, because while they stared at me with sympathy, I already knew something they didn't. By morning, my husband's empire, his accounts, his power, would be gone. Every dollar, every cent, mine. People thought I was weak. They thought betrayal would break me. But betrayal doesn't break. It builds. It sharpens. It forces you to choose between falling apart or becoming unshakable. And on that night, as he pressed his lips close to hers under the glow of the chandeliers, I had already chosen my path. This was never just about love. It was about control, about patience, about watching the man who thought he owned me walk straight into a trap that had been waiting for him from the very beginning. Before I tell you exactly how I pulled it off, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button, now. If you don't, you may never see how betrayal really works until it's too late. Don't think it can't touch you. It's closer than you believe. And I want you to drop where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see who's bold enough to speak and who chooses silence. But remember this, silence is how betrayal wins. My name is Taylor, and 2 years ago, I believed I had everything. I was 28, working as a marketing strategist in a firm that was finally recognizing my worth. I had just closed my biggest deal when Liam appeared in my life. He wasn't just charming, he was magnetic. A man who carried himself like the room belonged to him before he even stepped inside. We met at a tech conference in Chicago. I was presenting a case study. He was on the panel of investors. Afterward, he walked straight toward me with that confident smile, shook my hand, and said, "You're not just smart, you're dangerous." I laughed then, not knowing how true those words would become. From that day, he pursued me relentlessly. Dinners, late-night calls, surprise flowers on my desk. Within weeks, we were inseparable. Within months, he was on his knee with a ring. The kind of proposal people dream about, under a skyline lit with fireworks, cameras flashing as strangers cheered. 10 months after meeting him, I was Mrs. Liam Hart. At first, life with him felt like stepping into a fairy tale. He had just launched a startup that was already attracting attention, and I had the skill to help him scale it. Together, we built not just a marriage, but a brand, a business, an empire. The kind of life people envy on Instagram, the mansion with white pillars, the sleek cars with custom plates, the champagne-fueled parties where laughter drowned out the whispers of jealousy. But money and success, they change people. Or maybe, they reveal what was always there. I noticed it in small moments. The first time he said he was working late, but came home smelling of cologne that wasn't his. The second time, when I saw his phone light up with a message and he flipped it over before I could glance at the screen. His smile became less about me and more about maintaining an image. His words, once warm, grew guarded. They say trust doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks, quietly, invisibly, until one day the break is so wide you can no longer pretend it isn't there. That's what was happening to us. To me. I'd stare at him across our marble kitchen island, watching the way he typed furiously into his phone, his eyes refusing to meet mine. And I remember thinking, if I pressed him right now, would he lie? Would he even care enough to make it believable? The woman I had been, naive, hopeful, blind, was fading. In her place, someone sharper was emerging, someone who didn't cry herself to sleep, but lay awake, calculating. Someone who realized that maybe the universe had handed me a betrayal, so I could learn the art of power. One evening, the truth arrived, delivered not by confession, but by mistake. Liam had left his phone charging on the nightstand. He was in the shower, steam curling beneath the bathroom door. The screen lit up once, then twice, then again. A name I didn't recognize. Candace. I wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble was already waiting for me. I tapped the screen, and there it was, line after line of words that cut deeper than any blade. Last night was unforgettable. When can I see you again? She suspects nothing. Don't worry. I sat there frozen, my chest tight, my ears ringing with silence. I scrolled further. Pictures, hotel bookings, receipts of dinners I thought he had eaten with clients. My husband, the man who held my vows in his hand, was giving another woman the pieces of himself I once believed were mine alone. I remember placing the phone back on the table carefully, as if it were glass that might shatter. And I remember staring at the bathroom door, listening to the sound of water hitting tile. Each drop echoed like thunder. The man I married was only feet away, but already he was a stranger. That night I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I crawled into bed, my back to his side, tears burning but refusing to fall. My body shook in silence as he slept peacefully beside me, unaware that every dream I'd held about our future had just been buried. Over the next few days, I tested him. Small questions, harmless probes. How was your meeting? Who were you with? Each answer rehearsed, smooth, polished, lies dressed as casual truth, and I smiled back at him even as my heart splintered. There is a unique humiliation in betrayal. It is not just the act, it is the way it forces you to live two lives at once. The world sees a wife in love, smiling at parties, holding hands in public. But behind closed doors, she is broken, kneeling on the floor of her own bathroom, clutching her stomach to stop the ache of betrayal. But here's the thing about pain. It is fuel, and that fuel began to burn inside me, hotter than grief, sharper than despair. A fire that whispered, "Don't let him win. Don't let him take everything. Don't let him walk away thinking you are weak." I knew then I would never confront him in rage. Rage is loud, messy, easy to dismiss. No, my answer would be silent, calculated, final, and it would strike when he least expected it. Let me pause here. If you think you'd recognize betrayal before it devoured you, you're wrong. It wears smiles, it hides in routine, it disguises itself as love. Subscribe right now and tell me your city in the comments, because silence protects betrayal, and if you stay silent here, imagine who else in your life is counting on your silence to keep winning. And so I began to plan. Every move he made, I would study. Every lie he spoke, I would document. And with every step, I would turn my pain into the sharpest weapon he would never see coming. The night I discovered Liam's betrayal was the night I stopped being his wife in heart. But outwardly, nothing changed. I laughed when he laughed. I touched his arm when cameras flashed. I kissed him goodnight with lips that no longer belonged to him. Because from that night forward, I wasn't his wife. I was his shadow, his observer, his reckoning. The first step was knowledge. I needed proof, more than texts, more than suspicion. I hired Janet, a private investigator with a reputation for exposing secrets men would kill to protect. We met in a small cafe across town, away from prying eyes. She sat across from me with a leather folder and a calm voice. "You're not the first wife," she said, "but you could be the first to win." Within days, Janet had photographs. Liam stepping out of hotels, Liam holding Candace's hand in the back seat of his car, receipts, locations, timestamps. Piece by piece, my marriage unraveled in front of me, not with screams, but with documents sealed in plastic sleeves. Then came the finances. Liam had always been confident with money, but arrogance makes men sloppy. Bank transfers traced from our accounts to hers. Investments funneled quietly into a company under Candace's name. I studied the numbers with cold precision. Every dollar he tried to hide from me became a breadcrumb leading to his downfall. At night, while he slept soundly beside me, I was awake at my desk, opening accounts in my name, securing lawyers, making copies of every document Janet uncovered. Step by step, I built the scaffolding of a trap so tight he would never escape it. I set up new accounts offshore, untraceable. I moved small amounts of my own savings first, testing the waters, learning the systems, and when the time came, I would be ready to drain him dry. But it wasn't just about money, it was about timing. Revenge without timing is just anger. Timing is what turns revenge into justice. So I waited, patiently, watching him live in blissful ignorance, watching him spend money on her, laugh with her, lie to me with the same mouth he kissed her with. And every time he left the house, I checked the cameras I had installed. Every time he smiled at me, I saw the photographs Janet had delivered. Every time he touched me, I remembered his hands on her. He thought I was blind. But blindness was my disguise. He thought I was weak, but weakness was my mask. And beneath it all, a plan was forming that would not just expose him, it would end him. Listen to me. You think your money is safe. You think your partner could never betray you. That's what I thought too. But betrayal always hides closest to home. Hit subscribe now and tell me your city in the comments. I want to know who's awake enough to protect themselves and who's going to stay blind until it's too late. The day of reckoning was approaching. Our anniversary was coming, and he had already made plans to parade me in front of friends and family as if nothing was wrong. But what he didn't know was that this time he wouldn't be the one putting on a show. He thought it would be a night to celebrate us. In truth, it would be the night I sealed his fate. The anniversary came faster than I expected. 2 years of marriage, 2 years of promises, and now 2 years of lies. Liam insisted on throwing a grand party, a ballroom glowing with chandeliers, tables dressed in white silk, champagne chilled in crystal buckets. He told me it was a night to celebrate us. But I knew the truth. It was his stage, his mask, his performance. I played my role perfectly. I wore the gown he had chosen, midnight blue with silver sequins that caught the light. Guests stopped me to say I looked radiant. They said Liam was lucky. I smiled at each one, and not a soul could guess that I had already planned his ruin. The room was alive with music, glasses clinking, laughter spilling across marble floors. But underneath the noise I felt only silence, the silence of a woman waiting for her trap to close. And then she appeared. Candace, dressed in red, invited by Liam under some thin excuse of business. She didn't hide in the shadows. She didn't need to. She stood near the bar, her hand brushing against his when she thought no one noticed. But I noticed. Always. I watched him cross the room to her, as if the dozens of eyes around them meant nothing. He whispered into her ear, and she laughed, head tilted back, a sound that sliced through me like glass. And then, the moment. The music slowed. A waltz filled the room. Liam extended his hand, not to me, but to her. Gasps rippled across the crowd. People froze mid-sip, mid-sentence. And there they were, my husband and his mistress, slow dancing under golden lights as if I were invisible. His hand on her waist, her head against his chest. My name still written on the guest list, but erased from his heart. The whispers grew louder. Aunts covering their mouths, colleagues shaking their heads, friends too stunned to speak. All eyes searched for me, for the wife who should be collapsing, sobbing, storming out in disgrace. But I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I lifted my glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light, and I smiled. I smiled wider than I ever had before, because while they saw betrayal, I saw victory. While they thought I was broken, I was already whole. And while they pitied me, I was already counting down the hours until Liam's empire was mine. Now picture this, an entire room watching your humiliation unfold, whispers curling like knives around you. Would you stand tall? or would you crumble? Don't wait until life tests you. Subscribe right now and leave your city in the comments. Show me you're strong enough to face it. Because if you stay silent, the world will see you powerless, and no one forgets weakness. I let them finish their dance. I let the music fade. I let the room hold its breath in disbelief. And then I turned away, serene, untouched, while deep inside I counted the minutes until midnight, because when the clock struck 12, Liam would lose more than his dignity. He would lose everything. Midnight. The house was quiet, the party over, the champagne glasses still sticky on silver trays. Liam stumbled into bed hours earlier, drunk on arrogance, drunk on her. He didn't notice when I slipped away. He didn't care. I sat in the study with only the glow of my laptop to light the room. Every password, every code, every number, I already had them. For months I had prepared, and tonight I pressed the final keys. One by one, accounts drained, business holdings transferred, shares pulled from his name into mine, offshore reserves rerouted into private accounts he could never touch. Every cent he thought was his was leaving him in silence. No alarms, no sirens, just the quiet hum of transactions echoing across servers, stripping him bare while he slept. I remember the feeling as I clicked confirm. It wasn't joy, it wasn't revenge. It was justice, calm, absolute, permanent. Hours later the sun crept through the curtains, and Liam stirred awake. He reached for his phone first, as he always did, but instead of emails and markets, there were alerts. Overdrafts, frozen cards, failed transactions, confusion twisted into panic. His fingers shook as he dialed number after number, bankers, partners, lawyers. No one had answers. No one could stop what had already been done. I stood in the doorway, watching him unravel. His voice rose from confusion to anger to despair. The man who once strutted through rooms like he owned the air itself was now pacing in circles, hair disheveled, face pale, muttering curses to no one. And then Candace appeared. She walked in as if summoned by the chaos. She looked at him, looked at me, then back at the phone in his trembling hands. The realization hit her like a blow. The money, the reason she stayed, was gone. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned, heels striking the floor with finality, and left without a word. That was the last time I saw her. Liam called after her, his voice breaking, but the door shut behind her, and silence followed. The empire he built on lies was dust. His lover abandoned him. His wealth belonged to the wife he betrayed. 3 months later, the divorce was final. I kept the business. I kept the properties. I kept the future. And Liam. He kept nothing but the memory of the night his world collapsed. If you've ever doubted your own strength, remember this moment. Power isn't given, it's taken. Subscribe right now and tell me your city in the comments. Because if you stay silent, you'll never know how powerful you truly are until someone takes everything from you. Don't wait until it's too late. By the time the dust settled, Liam wasn't the man I had married. He was a ghost of himself, broken, bankrupt, alone, and every piece of it was his own doing. He handed me the weapon. All I did was pull the trigger. Liam thought the money would come back. He told himself it was a glitch, a mistake, something the banks would fix. But the days stretched into weeks, and the truth tightened around his throat like a rope. The board of his company turned on him first. Men who once raised glasses in his honor now whispered about fraud, incompetence, betrayal. His name was dragged into meetings he was no longer invited to. Investors pulled out. Clients vanished. Then came the lawsuits, one after another. Documents arrived in thick envelopes, breach of contract, unpaid debts, criminal investigations into his handling of funds. His empire wasn't just gone, it was rotting in the open for everyone to see. The press devoured him. Headlines painted him as a fallen titan, a reckless gambler, a man too blinded by lust and greed to hold on to the fortune he inherited. Everywhere he turned, doors slammed shut. No one answered his calls. No one wanted to be associated with him. Even old friends, the ones who once begged for invitations to his parties, disappeared like smoke. And then there was the silence at home. Empty rooms, no Candace, no laughter, no footsteps echoing down the marble floors. The mansion felt like a mausoleum. At night, the only sound was the creak of the walls and the restless pacing of a man who no longer knew who he was without wealth to shield him. I would see him sometimes from a distance, unkempt, shirt half-buttoned, eyes bloodshot. He would sit in the garden, staring at the fountain that no longer flowed because the bills went unpaid. The man who once towered over me now sat hunched, shoulders caved inward, a shadow of himself. And he knew exactly who had pulled the strings that unraveled him. Liam tried to fight back. He hired lawyers, expensive ones, men in tailored suits who promised miracles. But even they could see it. There was no miracle left to buy. One by one, his assets were seized. The cars that once lined his driveway were hauled away on flatbeds, their engines roaring like reminders of everything slipping from his grasp. The mansion, once filled with chandeliers and imported art, now carried the suffocating air of foreclosure. Notices began to plaster his gates. Strangers stopped to take pictures, gossiping as if they had always known this downfall was inevitable. But the cruelest blow wasn't from the lawyers, or the papers, or the public. It was from the people closest to him. His own relatives, the same ones who once praised him for his brilliance, turned their backs when he came knocking. They said his mistakes weren't their burden. They said his arrogance had written his fate. And through it all, Taylor never had to lift a hand. She watched silently from afar, not to gloat, not to laugh, but to bear witness to the unraveling of a man who thought she would always remain beneath his feet. Sometimes she wondered if Liam ever lay awake at night remembering the moment, the wedding day, the cruel laughter, the humiliation he had orchestrated. Did he think of her now, when the world refused to kneel for him? Did he finally understand what it felt like to be stripped of dignity, left to stand exposed before a crowd that only came to watch you fall? There were nights when Liam, desperate and half-broken, showed up at Taylor's door. His eyes, once sharp with control, now hollowed by sleeplessness and despair. He begged her, not for love, not even for forgiveness, but for the steadiness she carried in her silence. But Taylor only looked at him, calm, unshaken. She said nothing, because what words could mend the fractures he had carved into her life? And so Liam left each time, staggering back into the shadows, his footsteps uneven, his breathing heavy. Alone. Liam thought the worst was behind him, but it was only beginning. The empire he once boasted of, gone. The allies he thought would shield him, silent. Every door he knocked on was slammed in his face. Every hand he reached for pulled away before he could grasp it. And yet he refused to surrender. Pride, that was the last thing clinging to him, the last shred of the man he had been. Pride made him believe he could claw his way back to the top. Pride made him chase shadowy deals with men who smiled too easily, who promised too much. But those deals never bore fruit. They left him with debts instead, debts he could no longer pay. The whispers grew louder. Businessmen, once eager to be seen by his side, now spoke his name only in hushed tones, as if invoking it too loudly would bring misfortune. There were nights when he wandered the city, his suit rumpled, his tie loosened, looking less like a king and more like a ghost of one. He passed restaurants where he had once been the honored guest, and now the waiters eyed him with suspicion, whispering to the manager if he lingered too long. And in those same moments, Taylor's life was moving in a different direction. She did not chase revenge. She did not shout his name in the streets. No, her revenge was her silence, her strength, her refusal to break. Opportunities came her way, almost as if the world had been waiting for her to step forward. People noticed her resilience, her calm. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. Those who had overlooked her before now sought her advice, her presence, her partnership. While Liam slipped deeper into shadows, Taylor rose into light. And he saw it. That was the cruelest part. He saw her flourishing, while he withered. It gnawed at him like a disease. Each glimpse of her in the public eye, calm, graceful, untouchable, was another nail in the coffin of his pride. She had become what he once denied her, respected, admired, free. And Liam was left to choke on the ashes of the kingdom he had set ablaze with his own hands. Liam thought the walls could not close in further, but they did. He still had one lifeline, one person he believed would never abandon him. A friend from his early days, a man who had eaten with him when neither of them had more than a few coins to share. That friend had walked beside him when the empire was nothing but an idea scribbled on paper, and so Liam clung to that bond, convinced it would never break. But desperation changes people. When creditors circled, when Liam's name brought more risk than reward, that friend made a choice. He sold Liam out. With a single signature, a single quiet deal behind closed doors, he gave Liam's last holdings to the very rivals who had once bowed before him. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. It was not just business, it was personal. The one man he trusted had chosen survival over loyalty, and Liam was left with nothing but his fury. He tried to confront him. He stormed to his house, fists clenched, voice raised. But when the door opened, the friend did not flinch. He simply looked at Liam with a cold, empty stare, as if he no longer recognized the man before him. And then, the door shut. For Liam, it was like the sound of a coffin closing. Every night after, he replayed that moment. The silence, the rejection, the certainty that he had been erased from the very lives he once thought he controlled. Meanwhile, Taylor's presence only grew stronger. She did not seek the spotlight. It sought her. She moved with a quiet dignity, a calm that made others lean in to hear her words. Invitations arrived, partnerships unfolded. Doors that had been locked tight were now opening for her without effort. She walked through them with grace. And Liam saw it all. At first he tried to dismiss it. He told himself it was temporary, a passing wave. But as the weeks stretched into months, reality became undeniable. The woman he once dismissed, the woman he believed could never rise without him, was rising higher than he had ever stood, and it haunted him. Her name lingered in every circle he could no longer enter. Her face appeared in places where his was no longer welcome. Even in the silence of his empty apartment, her presence lingered, not through words, not through vengeance, but through the reminder that she had endured while he had crumbled. Liam could no longer escape it. The very air around him seemed to whisper her name. Taylor, Taylor, Taylor. And with every whisper his pride rotted away, leaving only a hollow shell of the man he once was. Sleep no longer came easily to Liam. Nights that were once filled with laughter, luxury, and the soft glow of chandeliers were now replaced by long hours of silence. He would lie in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, hearing the faint creaks of the old building he now called home. But in that silence, her image returned. Taylor, standing tall, smiling faintly, glowing with the light of resilience. He tried to block her out. He tried to silence her memory with drink, with noise, with reckless distractions. But the more he resisted, the stronger her presence became. It was as though she lived rent-free in his mind, a constant reminder of what he had lost, and who had taken it from him. The city he once commanded now felt like a cage. Every street corner, every cafe, every hall he dared to enter whispered stories of her success. Strangers spoke her name in admiration. Colleagues praised her rise, and even those who had once bowed to him now turned their eyes toward her with respect. It broke him in ways wealth never could. The empire he once thought eternal had crumbled, but worse than the loss of money was the loss of reverence. He was no longer feared, no longer envied, no longer remembered as a man of power. And in his place, Taylor stood, unshaken, untouchable. He began to wither. His health, once buoyed by expensive indulgence, now faltered under the weight of stress. His hands shook when he lifted a glass. His reflection stared back with sunken eyes, lined with shadows of sleepless nights. Still, he clung to pride. He told himself this was temporary, that the tide would turn, that somehow he would reclaim what was stolen. But deep down, a gnawing fear festered. What if this wasn't temporary? What if his downfall was permanent? What if Taylor's strength was not luck, but destiny? And so the torment grew. Every attempt to rebuild failed. Investors no longer trusted his word. Old allies refused to answer his calls. Even strangers sensed his desperation, turning their faces away as he passed. He was a ghost wandering through the ruins of his own legacy. And Taylor, she never raised a hand against him. She never spoke ill of him. She never sought revenge in public. Her silence was sharper than any blade. Because in that silence Liam saw the truth. She did not need to destroy him. He was doing that all by himself. Days bled into nights, and nights into endless mornings. For Liam, time no longer carried the promise of renewal. Each dawn only dragged in another weight of despair. He could not escape her. Taylor's name followed him like a shadow. It was on the lips of those he passed in the marketplace, in the hushed conversations of businessmen he once commanded, even in the laughter of children who admired her charities. And the more he heard it, the more he became convinced this was no accident. No rise of hers could be so flawless, no recovery so complete. Someone, something, was orchestrating this. He began to whisper her name to himself at night. Taylor, over and over again, as if it were a curse that would not break. He told himself she was watching him. He told himself she was pulling invisible strings, ensuring he never found footing again. When a business partner rejected him, he imagined her hand guiding the decision. When a deal collapsed, he pictured her standing behind the curtain, smiling, waiting. The paranoia grew teeth. He started avoiding places he once loved, afraid he would see her there, afraid that in some cruel twist she would look at him with pity, or worse, disregard. And yet, he sought her out. Late at night, he lingered near the tall glass towers where she now held meetings. From the shadows, he watched. The lights burned bright in her offices, and through the tinted glass he caught glimpses of her, poised, composed, radiant. She was untouchable. Every glance confirmed his greatest fear. She had not only survived him, she had surpassed him. Liam's mind unraveled further. He stopped sleeping. He scribbled plans on scraps of paper, plans to restore what was lost, schemes of alliances, partnerships, ventures. But each one ended the same way, crossed out, abandoned, hopeless. Because at the end of every plan stood her face. Taylor. Her silence was louder than any accusation, her success more brutal than any attack. And the thought consumed him. What if she knew? What if this quiet triumph of hers was deliberate, meant to watch him drown in his own downfall? The walls of his shabby apartment became witnesses to his rants. He spoke to them as if they were a jury. He pleaded with them, cursed her name, cursed himself. But the walls only echoed back the truth he could not accept, that he was no longer the victor of his own story. He was the cautionary tale, and Taylor was the legend being written in his place. Sleep abandoned him. Food lost all taste. The days were measured not by the ticking of clocks, but by the rhythm of his own restless footsteps pacing across the floor. Liam no longer lived. He lingered. And yet, his mind could not leave her. Taylor's image had burned itself into his thoughts, etched into every moment, haunting every breath. When he closed his eyes, he saw her smile, serene, effortless. When he opened them, he saw her face again, on billboards, in magazines, on television interviews, where she spoke with quiet grace. Her voice slipped into his world uninvited, echoing through radios and taxicabs and glowing across the screens of cafes he stumbled into. It was as though the world itself had conspired to keep her before him, reminding him of everything he had lost, everything he had thrown away. And so, Liam began to wander. He lurked near the high-rise hotels where she hosted galas. He drifted along the sidewalks outside the studios where cameras captured her. He stood across the street, hidden beneath the shadow of a hood, watching the black cars arrive to escort her. He told himself it was curiosity, but it wasn't. It was desperation. He needed to see her. He needed to measure how far she had climbed, so he could measure how far he had fallen. And every glimpse of her was another dagger. She laughed now in public as though sorrow had never touched her. She walked with confidence, each step carrying the weight of someone who had conquered pain and turned it into power. People leaned toward her when she spoke, as if her words carried light. And Liam had become invisible. He sat on benches where no one glanced his way. He slipped into rooms where no one remembered his name. He was no longer the man who commanded attention. He was the ghost of a man who once believed the world bent to his will. The more he saw her, the more his own reflection became unbearable. He stopped looking into mirrors. He stopped answering calls. He stopped opening letters. His debts mounted. His landlord threatened, and yet none of it mattered. What consumed him was her. Taylor had become more than a woman to him. She was a symbol, a force, a living reminder that the one thing he thought he had destroyed had risen, and in rising, had crushed him beneath its shadow. And deep in the quiet hours of night, when the city fell still and his thoughts grew loud, Liam whispered the same question again and again, a question that twisted through his veins like poison. Did she plan this? Had she orchestrated every silence, every smile, every step, to watch him rot in the ruins of his pride? The thought gnawed at him until there was nothing left but that possibility. And once it took root, there was no going back. For Liam, reality was no longer certain. Only one truth remained. Taylor had defeated him, and he could not rest until he understood how or why. Days became weeks, weeks became months, yet Liam's fixation did not fade, it deepened. His apartment had withered into a hollow cage. The curtains stayed drawn, dust crawled across every surface, and the air was thick with neglect. He no longer cared. The only light that entered his world was the glow of screens, screens that showed her, Taylor. Her name had become the single rhythm of his life. He followed the whispers of her schedule through gossip columns, online threads, fleeting mentions in magazines discarded at coffee shops. Each discovery lit a fire in his chest. Each absence left him shaking, as though starved. He found himself standing outside her charity events, watching the grand chandeliers through tinted windows. He lingered at the edges of red carpets, lost in the crowd, eyes locked on her as photographers shouted her name. And every time she appeared, she was radiant, composed, untouchable. Every time she smiled, it shredded him. Every laugh that left her lips was a blade across his pride. She didn't just move on, she soared, while he was sinking. Liam's clothes hung looser now. His eyes were hollow. His hands trembled when he lit his cigarettes. He had once been the man who filled rooms with his presence. Now, people brushed past him on sidewalks without a glance. But worse than the loneliness was the suspicion, the way she never looked his way, the way her gaze never faltered, as if she knew he was there. Sometimes Liam swore her eyes flickered toward him, just for a breath, just for a second, before she turned back to her admirers, dismissing him without a word. It was unbearable. And in those moments, standing in the shadows, Liam began to ask himself questions that chilled even his own thoughts. What if she wanted this? What if she wanted him to suffer like this? What if every smile she gave in public was sharpened, aimed directly at him? The paranoia clawed deeper, stripping him of reason. Sleep slipped further from his grasp. The lines between what was real and what he imagined began to blur. He replayed old conversations in his head, picking apart every syllable she had spoken years before. He searched for hidden meanings, coded warnings, subtle threats. And slowly he began to convince himself of something dreadful, that Taylor's revenge was not complete, that she was waiting, watching, smiling as he unraveled. And Liam, in his broken state, whispered promises to himself, promises he could neither escape nor erase. He would not let her win forever. One night soon, he would step from the shadows, and when he did, she would know he was there. Liam's nights no longer belonged to him. They belonged to her. He would sit alone in his darkened apartment, the city alive beyond his window, while his own life remained frozen. His phone screen lit his hollow face, the glow reflecting in his restless eyes as he scrolled through every trace of Taylor he could find. The charity galas, the fashion features, the candid photographs of her walking through airports, smiling faintly at strangers who recognized her. Every picture was a wound, every headline a reminder of how far she had soared without him. And yet, in every image, Liam searched for something, some small sign, a crack, a flicker in her smile that suggested she remembered him, that she regretted. But there was nothing, and so he watched and waited, and convinced himself that her perfection was a performance, staged only to break him further. Liam began leaving his apartment in the middle of the night, wandering streets that led him, always, to where she had been. Empty theaters where she once gave speeches, quiet restaurants she had been photographed outside, corners of the city where her perfume seemed to linger in his memory. He stood there for hours, as though the walls themselves could tell him the truth. Neighbors began to notice his decline. The man who once carried himself with elegance now moved like a shadow. His beard grew uneven, his clothes unkempt. Whispers followed him in stairwells, in lobbies, in the marketplace. But Liam heard none of it, because in his mind there was only one voice, hers. It echoed from the past, curling into his present, mocking him in the silence. A soft laugh, a simple phrase, a memory that no longer belonged to anyone but him. And each time the memory replayed, Liam tightened his grip on the glass in his hand until his knuckles turned white. Taylor was winning, and he couldn't let that happen. One evening, after another sleepless night, Liam found himself standing across the street from one of her grand events. The building glittered with chandeliers, the street crowded with flashing cameras and chattering reporters. And there she was, Taylor, descending the steps like royalty, her gown shimmering under the lights, her smile radiant. Every head turned to her, every voice called her name, but Liam didn't hear them. He only heard the pounding in his chest. He was close enough to see the detail in her earrings, the softness in her hair, close enough to believe that if he called her name, she would hear him. And yet she never looked his way. Not once. It was as though he didn't exist. And in that moment, Liam's reality fractured further. He whispered to himself, lips trembling, breath shallow, "She knows I'm here. She knows. She wants me to suffer like this." The crowd cheered louder, and for a brief instant he thought he saw her glance past the cameras, past the people, past the lights, right at him. But then she turned, stepping into a waiting car, her laughter carried into the night. And Liam stood frozen in the shadows, fists clenched, heart unraveling, whispering again and again into the dark, "She knows, she knows, she knows." After that night outside the gala, something inside Liam snapped. He could no longer tell the difference between coincidence and design. Every step Taylor took in the world felt orchestrated to remind him of her power. Every headline felt like a taunt. He told himself she wanted him to see her everywhere, that she wanted him to feel invisible. And so he began keeping track, on scraps of paper, on the back of envelopes, on the walls of his dimly lit apartment. Dates, times, addresses, clippings from magazines, taped neatly in rows. Taylor's life, charted like a constellation, until the walls themselves seemed to close in on him, covered in her face, her smile, her eyes. Neighbors who passed his door at night could hear the scratching of his pen, the muttering of his voice as he spoke to no one. She knows. She knows. She knows. But it wasn't enough to watch anymore. Liam began following. At first he kept a distance, blending into crowds, watching her step out of black cars surrounded by handlers, assistants, admirers. Always the same perfect wave, the same smile that cut him like glass. But each time he inched closer and closer, until one afternoon, as she left a boutique in the city, Liam found himself standing only a few feet away, close enough to hear her voice as she laughed softly with her companion, close enough to breathe in the faint trace of her perfume. For a heartbeat the world slowed. This was the woman he once held, the woman who once whispered secrets only to him, and now she passed by him like a stranger. Her eyes did not flicker, her step did not falter. She walked right past, as though he were air. Liam's chest tightened, his lips quivered, his entire body shook as the truth seared into him. To her, he was nothing. That night, Liam sat alone, staring at the floor. Empty bottles surrounded him, the air thick and sour. He whispered to himself, his voice broken, low, almost childlike. She took everything and left me with nothing. But then his tone shifted, sharpened, hardened. No, she hasn't won. Not yet. She thinks she's untouchable. But no one is untouchable. No one. For the first time in weeks, Liam smiled. It was faint, crooked, cold, because in his fractured mind, the story was no longer about loss. It was about correction, and he was ready to act. From that night forward, Liam no longer lived in his own world. He lived in hers. His mornings began not with breakfast or work, but with scanning the news for her name. His afternoons were spent lurking outside studios, hotels, restaurants, wherever she might appear, and his nights were endless vigils, waiting, watching, scribbling, connecting dots only he believed were there. The photographs on his walls multiplied, some torn from glossy magazines, others printed from grainy cell phone captures he took from across the street. In every picture, her smile seemed to mock him. In every article, her success screamed of betrayal. But it wasn't enough to see her from a distance. No, Liam needed proof. Proof that Taylor remembered him. Proof that she still carried even a flicker of the bond they once had. And so he began testing fate. He would stand near the curb where her car would pass, staring, unblinking, waiting for her gaze to catch his. He would brush by her entourage, close enough that his shoulder grazed the fabric of a guard's sleeve. He began writing letters, long, rambling confessions, pleas, warnings, pages upon pages stuffed into envelopes with shaking hands, letters he never mailed, but read aloud to himself at night, convinced the words were powerful enough to summon her. And then came the first whisper. A woman from his building, middle-aged, weary, carrying groceries, paused outside his door. She glanced at the wall of clippings through the crack as he came out, and muttered softly, almost to herself, "Poor man's losing his mind." Liam froze. In that moment, paranoia bloomed like fire in his chest. If she noticed, who else had noticed? What if Taylor already knew? What if her silence wasn't indifference, but mockery? That thought consumed him. Every sound in the hallway became suspicious. Every knock, every footstep outside his door sent him lunging to the peephole. The world outside was watching him, laughing at him, talking about him, and Liam decided he would no longer be the one watched. It was time to make her see him again, one way or another. By now, Liam was no longer simply a man. He was a shadow stitched to her life, feeding on her presence, surviving on the thought that at any moment she would remember. But shadows grow bolder when left unchecked. And Liam was ready. The wall of photographs wasn't enough. The sleepless nights weren't enough. The near encounters weren't enough. He wanted more. And so, one cold evening, as the city lights blurred into streaks across the windshield of a borrowed car, Liam whispered aloud, "Tonight, she will see me." In his pocket, a key, copied from an old contact, someone who never should have trusted him, clinked softly with every breath. It was the key to a place she thought was safe, a place no fan, no stranger, no ghost from her past could ever reach. And yet, Liam now held that fragile line between distance and trespass. His fingers tightened around it. His pulse hammered in his throat. And as he stepped out into the night air, one truth chilled him deeper than the winter wind. Once he crossed this threshold, there would be no going back. Not for him, not for her, not for anyone.